Hey guys, Philos here. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the recent changes in patch 2.0.5 for the Demon Hunter and some things you might want to consider. I wanted to release something sooner, but at the same time, I wanted to be able to experiment with the changes and see, how to address it and things like that. Kind of the best combinations and stuff. So I spent about a week, 5 or 6 days testing stuff, and feel like I've come to some conclusions and I can share my results here now with you guys. So the first thing we're going to talk about is awareness. A lot of you guys are already familiar. You already know it's adding value to dexterity. So in the past, I recommended all res and maybe some vitality in your gems to make up for the lack of EHP. With this change, on the higher difficulties, you're able to socket full dex, throw on awareness, and get pretty good value from that armor and from the dexterity. I lost a little bit of EHP and I gained a lot of damage, so it was worth the trade-off for me, and it allowed me to transition from all res to full dex gems. And you can see here with this setup, I have plenty of toughness and I have full dexterity gems. My all res is a little low, but the armor is really high, so it doesn't really matter as long as you have a nice balance between the two. It doesn't matter if, with the awareness situation and the dex, probably going to end up with more armor than all res in terms of the 1-to-10 ratio. So that's that. If you're not already running full dex gems, look into it. It could be good value for you. It worked for me and I'm loving it. So the other thing is the 6-piece Marauder. The sentries casting your equipped hatred spenders. A lot of you guys know in the past this set bonus wasn't really good value. There was a really long cooldown on the sentries casting the spenders, and they didn't really rotate between spenders. Well, now there's a rotation and the cooldowns between the abilities are a lot less, so the result is the sentries are actually casting your spenders quite a lot, and you can get really good value out of this situation. It's not the best group build, it doesn't have the most burst, but it is a really good build for solo gameplay or helping carry groups. If you're not in a well-organized group, it's going to do really well. It's a nice sturdy build, very well sustained and self-sufficient. So you're not really going to be dependent on the group to make the build successful. It's a really strong, independent build. That's what I like about it. That is pretty much any variation of the Sentry build. I'm running a specific version that's very tuned to my gear. And in terms of making videos for the builds, I'm going to make different videos for different builds, but at the same time, the important thing to keep in mind the whole time is there are going to be a lot of good combinations that are going to work. So, just kind of explore the options, and if you have the 6-piece Marauder and you're wondering which spenders are the best and what's stronger, fire or physical, they're all doing really, really close to the same. I've been running tests for the past almost week trying to figure out which one is better. I'm having a really hard time to come to any definitive conclusion. Basically, where I'm at is if the fire is a little bit better on the single target, the physical is a little bit better on the AoE. In general, the build lacks single target, so that's why the fire is kind of doing a little bit better. My specific build, there's also more synergy with the fire, and the fire is easier to transition into. So, in general, most people are probably going to end up going the fire version and going to have success with that. But again, the thing to take away is a lot of things are working. There's a lot of viable combinations. And I'm just going to kind of touch on a few different ones and maybe kind of help as a reference for you guys to run with some combinations. So this is the one that I have. This is specific to my gear. I have a weapon that's enabling me to utilize the spike trap. Generally speaking, you're not going to want to run the spike trap, so what I would recommend in this slot is if you have a fair amount of cooldown reduction, you can fit in the Rain of Vengeance. You can go with either of the fire runes, the Stampede or the Anthema. Either one of these is going to be really strong for that burst, and because if you do have maybe 30 to 50% cooldown reduction, you're going to be able to get good value out of that. If you're lacking cooldown reduction and you have more resource reduction, you might want to go with the cycling variation of the build. You can put punishment here, change this to suppression fire, and then you're in the position to do the standard cycling build, some cluster arrows, and then some turrets on top. A lot of people are kind of like enjoying this variation, again with the resource reduction gear that most people have at this point. This is going to be a really good one. And then the other question I get a lot is, Cinder Coat versus Tasker versus Hexing, because with the Ring of the Grandeur, you're enabled to sub out one of the Marauder slots for some other item. So basically you can choose either Tasker or Cinder Coat or Andariels or the Hexing Pants, but you can't combine any of the two. And from my experience, the Taskers are doing really well. They're not exactly increasing the spender rate, but because it increases the frequency of the sentry, it's effectively increasing the spender rate. And over the course of the duration of the entire sentry, it does add up, and it is quite effective. So I definitely recommend the Taskers. If you don't have the Taskers, you can sub in the Cinder Coat or the Hexing Pants or even an Andariels. Any of these is probably going to be stronger than just running the standard 6 pieces of Marauder. So that's something to keep in mind. I've had the most success with the Taskers. They're doing really well. It is going to depend kind of on which abilities you're running, whether or not the Taskers are going to give good value or not. It's kind of a complicated situation, but in general, I am valuing the Taskers very highly for any sentry-based build. And in terms of other options, this one's going to be really popular. And with this kind of variation, there are going to be some other preference options. If you prefer to shoot more cluster arrows and rely less on the sentries, you can run the Cinder Coat over the Tasker. From my experience, the Taskers are doing better, and you're better off just not really worrying about casting much on your own. But with the cycling variation, with a lot of resource reduction, you could do well with that Cinder Coat. So the resource reduction version, the cooldown reduction version, and then the cannon bolter version. These are all fire variations. There's also going to be some physical variations. You can go essentially the same route. You just switch the loader for bear to the shooting stars. Switch the Spitfire. You can either go Guardian for the defense or Impaling for the extra pierce. I'm going to value probably the Guardian over the Impale. The additional pierce on the regular Sentry Bolt isn't very strong. The build already has a lot of AoE. So that's not doing really well. I would definitely run with the Guardian here for the physical. And again, you can run either the Punishment Suppression Cycling version, or here I would probably just go with full broadside for the maximum damage, and then change this to the Rain of Vengeance and try to get as much cooldown reduction as possible. And you can either go with the Dark Cloud. At that point, you just want to make sure it's one of the physical ones, so either this or this. And there also is the option of using the Strong Arm Bracers combined with the knockback here. That's doing pretty well. Most of the time I like the Reaper Wraps for the resources, but if you're doing a resource reduction cycling build, you might not really need the Hatred there. Could go either way. In terms of passives, again, there's a lot of flexibility. The only thing to keep in mind is, as of right now, the Call of the Week is apparently not working with the sentries. So this would be the only one I would kind of avoid using. Steady Aim's doing well, Custom Engineering is doing well, Ambush, all of them are really good. The only one to avoid, I would say, is the Call of the Week. All of the standard damage passives are doing really well. And if you're having resource issues, you can sub in Blood Vengeance or Night Stalker. Something to keep in mind here is the sentries are not going to proc anything, so Suppression Fire, you're not going to get discipline back from your sentries. Night Stalker, you're not going to get discipline back from the crits. So Night Stalker in the Sentry build, not really strong. Blood Vengeance does well though. And I mean, other than that, you know, again, like I said before, the thing to take away is there's going to be a lot of viable combinations of abilities that you can run. So just kind of see what you can get working and test with different things. I've had the most success with the cluster arrow and the multi-shot variations, and specifically the fire. One other thing to keep in mind when you're running sentry-based builds is the two-hander versus the one-hander. Most of the time the two-hander is going to scale better because the sentries are based off of the weapon damage range, so it's really beneficial to have a high weapon damage. And the quiver here, I mean, this quiver is going to be best in slot for this build, so you're not going to be in the position to dual wield to benefit from the double crit damage. So most of the time for a sentry based build, I would definitely recommend going with the two-hander. But again, you know, to each their own kind of thing. There are going to be situations and itemizations that are going to benefit from one or the other. So it's pretty well balanced all around. That's going to do it for this video on the changes, and you guys can expect to see some different variations of the builds in videos in the near future. Thanks for watching. See you next time.